In this video, I'm going to talk just a little bit about port security, and then we'll go through the configuration and kind of verify how it behaves. So for port security, what it does is it limits the number and which MAC addresses are allowed on a particular switch interface. So it's a port-by-port configuration. I could have one port where I'm allowing only one MAC address to be seen, and another port where I'm allowing 5 MAC addresses to be seen. And I'm going to do that, like I said, port by port. What that's going to do is help to mitigate CAM table or MAC address table flooding or overflows. It can also help to mitigate the overusage of DHCP resources, right? So if I have, a hacking computer or program or whatever running, and it keeps requesting, it shows up with valid device parameters and keeps requesting DHCP. I can actually use up all my DHCP server resources. I can fill up my MAC address table with a MAC address table overflow. So if I'm only allowing a particular number or even a particular MAC address, I can kind of help to mitigate those issues. And it's really pretty easy to configure. The only two required configurations are these two here. So you need to first configure the interface as being either an access mode or a trunk. So it's either an access interface or a trunk interface. And then you have to enable port security. And that's all you have to do. We have some optional commands. When you just enable port security with the switch port security command, by default, one MAC address will be learned and allowed. So the first MAC address it sees, it'll put in the MAC address table, and it will only allow that MAC address until you reload. We'll explain that a little more later if you reboot the switch. And then when a violation does occur, so I see a MAC address that's different than the one that I put in the table, and there's more than one, because it would be an additional one, I guess, it is violation. The default operation is shut down. And I put that shut down in quotes because in the next section I'll talk about the three security violation actions. But I put it in quotes. This doesn't really shut down the interface. It puts the interface in what we call error disable mode. But these are the only two required. Decide whether or not the interface is access or trunk, and then switch port security. If you only do these two things, then by default one MAC address will be learned and allowed, and when the violation occurs, the action is shut down. So what are my optional ones then? So the first one I look at is I can statically configure allowed MAC addresses. So I know that I have, and this could be an administrative headache in a sense, and we have a compromise in between there. But let's say I've got a server on that interface. Maybe off of some major switches, I run a few servers. I know that that is the only MAC address that I want to have seen. So I can type that MAC address in. Or the other option is also probably just as likely as that I make that interface a trunking interface, and I've got a server at the other end that's trunking multiple virtual machines, but then I can specify each of those MAC addresses as well. And I could say, MAC address 1111 dot, or colon, whatever. So I can say, okay, I only want this MAC address to be allowed. If you see anything else, that's a violation. The next option is to configure the maximum number of MAC addresses. And one instance where you might want to do that is if you're running voice, or voice to the desktop, for example. So embedded in a Cisco IP phone is a switch. So I can connect my phone to my jack, right, in my wall most likely, that goes back to the switch that we're running port security on. So in essence, I'm connecting the phone to the switch, and then I connect my PC or the desktop or laptop or whatever we're using at our desk. We plug that into the phone. So that's at least 2 MAC addresses, and likely one more because of the way that runs. But you have at least the phone and you have at least the PC that you connected in there, right? So you have to have at least 2. And you can have, for any number of reasons, an additional number of MAC addresses that you want to allow. So when I do the switch port, this should be a dash here. That bothers me. Switch port dash security maximum, and then I put the number in there. Now maybe it's 7. So I'm going to allow 7 MAC addresses to be learned and put in the MAC address table. Once those 7 have been learned, anything beyond those 7 is a violation. And then the port will do whatever we told it to do. The default is the shutdown, which, like I said earlier, is really error disable mode. Addresses learn dynamically by using the switch port security maximum command are added to the address table, but not the running config. So it's added to the MAC address table, but not the running config. So now we have something just a little bit different, and maybe a bit of a compromise between statically configuring each of our MAC addresses, but also knowing that we only want certain MAC addresses to be allowed on an interface. We could do dynamic sticky learning, which means learn the addresses dynamically, but once I've learned them, put them in the running config. So then what I can do as an administrator, I don't have to type each one in, right? I don't have to go to each switch and, I've got a 48 port switch and it all goes back to the accounting department because, I don't know, we have a massive accounting department. I can let them just all plug in and turn on their computers. Basically, we probably have them already wired in if we've done it to this point, but everybody turns on their computers. The switch, all 48 ports learn a MAC address. Because I've used sticky learning, those MAC addresses go into the running configuration that's running on the switch. Now as an administrator, all I have to do is save that running configuration. Save it to NVRAM, save it to NVRAM and an FTP server, whatever you want. But once I save that running config now, if the device gets reloaded for any reason, still when it starts up again, the only addresses that will be allowed on those ports are the ones that it originally learned. So the difference between this command and this command is simply that this one will only put it in the MAC address table. I can't do, like, say, a copy run start to save to NVRAM and then have saved those MAC addresses because it only goes in the table. Whereas this one, it goes into the MAC address table and the running config. So if I save the running config, then I can also save those MAC addresses that have been learned. So those are optional. And then our last optional is to configure a violation action. So the default violation action is shut down. Our other options are protect, restrict. Well, our other options are protect and restrict. So all of our options are protect, restrict, shut down. What protect does is all unknown MAC addresses will be dropped, which is exactly what restrict does. But in addition, restrict will send a syslog and an SNMP message, actually called the SNMP trap. So protect says, okay, anything past what's not in my table, because that's what's been allowed, or anything that violates the port security configuration, all those packets, they're just all going to be dropped. Restrict says, okay, we're still going to drop those packets, but let's send a message out. Let's send a syslog and an SNMP trap to let everyone know that, hey, you've got something happening here. And then shutdown is our default mode, which really means the port goes into error disabled state. You can't even use it. I think, if I remember, the LED even goes off, so the light will go off. And then it will also send a syslog and SNMP message so that you know. And the commands, the statically configure, I've had them in blue under here. I didn't really go through them, but the statically configure a particular MAC address. The command is switch port security, MAC address, and then whatever the MAC address is. To configure a maximum number or a number greater than 1 to be learned for MAC addresses, I can do switch port security maximum, and this should be a dash between port and security again, maximum, and then whatever that number is. You can actually do a combination of these two. So let's say I want to allow 3 MAC addresses to be learned, and I know one of them that I want to always be on there. Maybe in my phone example, it's the MAC address for the phone. So I specifically type in the MAC address for the phone. That's one of my 3 available MAC addresses. When I said the maximum number was 3, the other 2 will be dynamically learned and put into the MAC address table. Same thing with down here. So then switch port security, MAC address sticky. If I have this command in addition to this command, then my additional 2 that I talked about in just my previous example would actually also be added to the running config. So I would actually see all 3 addresses in my running config. And then the violation is switch port, or the violation action is switch port security violation, and then I choose one. I don't ever have these braces here. That's just my way of letting you know that this is the parameter that you have to choose, whereas this is the form of the command. So it's protect, restrict, or shut down. So now let's go ahead and look at how it's configured and how it behaves. So I'm going to do something really simple here. All I've got is one switch and one computer. And we're just going to configure port security. We're going to configure port security on the Ethernet 6. And I think in this particular switch, I oftentimes will use E6 because I may be using a fast Ethernet. I may be using a gig switch. I think this particular switch might be fast Ethernet, so I could have put an FA0/6 here. So I just use E6, so you know it's an Ethernet interface, and the port number is 6. So let's go ahead and bring the terminal over with a console connection for switch 1. All right, so now let's go ahead and configure port security. We'll first do just basic port security, just the 2 commands that you're required to have. Then I'll assign a static MAC address. Then I'll change the maximum number of allowed MAC addresses, and then we'll do sticky learning so we can see it in the running config. So we'll go into our 6 interface, our Ethernet 6 interface. In this case, it's a fast Ethernet. First, we have to tell the switch whether it's an access port or a trunking port. It'll be an access port, so we'll do switch port mode access. And then we have to enable port security. So switch port port-security, and that's it. And then we can go ahead and verify it. Do show port security interface FA0/6. And we see the port security on 06 is enabled. Port status is secure up, which means that port security is running. No violation has occurred. The violation mode then is shut down. That's the default. So remember, my defaults, if I just leave it at default, is maximum MAC addresses allowed to be learned is 1. And if a violation occurs, the violation mode is shut down. And so our maximum MAC address is in fact 1. The total MAC addresses that it's learned is 1. And the last one it learned ended in 4803, which is the PC we have connected to the switch. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. So now let's go ahead and configure a static MAC address, just so we can demonstrate that. Now I'm going to demonstrate an incorrect and the wrong MAC address, configuring the wrong MAC address, and the reason being is just that you can see what happens when a violation for port security occurs. So right now I just have the one PC. It's always going to see the same MAC address, so I can't create a violation. But if I statically assign the wrong MAC address, one, you can see what you have to do to statically assign a MAC address. Statically allow, I shouldn't say assign, because you're not configuring a MAC address. You're not changing the MAC address of that interface by any means, but you're statically allowing a MAC address to report security. And then you're going to also be able to see what it looks like when a violation occurs. So let's go ahead and switch port security, MAC address. I'm going to go really close to the other one, just that way we can keep referring to just the last 4 digits. So 0050. 5681, and then I'm just going to do 4805 instead of 4803. So the MAC address of the PC that's connected on VLAN 1 has last word is 4803. That's the PC I actually have in the topology. But I'm going to statically assign a MAC address, which you, of course, in your actual environment would statically assign the correct MAC address. I'm just doing it here to demonstrate error disable, or to demonstrate what happens when a violation occurs and the default violation mode is shut down, or the violation mode is shut down. So let's go ahead and hit enter. Now the first thing you're going to see is port security working correctly and telling me that I've already reached my maximum limit. The maximum allowed MAC addresses on that interface is 1, and I've already learned 1. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shut the interface down, and then I'm going to enter this command again. Shutting the interface down will remove that MAC address from the MAC address table. So hit the up arrow. And again, we can enter this command now. And then let's go ahead and activate the interface with a no shut. Now nothing is going to happen. There's going to be no violation until the PC actually tries to send a packet through the switch. Because until the switch sees the violating MAC address, or the MAC address that's the wrong one, it's not going to do anything. So I'm going to go over to my PC real quick, and then I'll come back to this, but I'm going to go over there and ping just to create some traffic. So I did that real quick, and now you can see that we have a port security violation. We went into error disabled because of a port security violation error detected on FA06. And then it also tells me that, again, violation occurred. We kind of know that from up here. But then it'll also tell me the source MAC address. So the violating MAC address is 4803, which is the actual physical PC that I've connected to the switch. Now, let's just get out of there. Let's do a show interface FA0/6. And you can see now that it's down, and it's an error disabled state. There's a couple things I can do to get rid of that. For this demonstration, we're going to do a shut, no shut. One of the other things you could do is globally configure the error disable recovery feature. We'll look at that. The other thing I want to do real quick is if I do a show port security interface FA0/6, how does that look different than it did before? Port security is still enabled. Now the difference is a violation's occurred. Remember it said secure up before? Now a violation has now a violation has occurred, so we're secure shut down. And the last MAC address that it actually did see is still 4803. It's the last one it actually did see, whether it's violating or not. So we've seen what it looks like when we have a violation occur and the default mode is shut down. I could do a shut, no shut on the interface. That's how I can bring it out of error disabled. The problem is if I do that right now, it's still going to have the same problem, right? Because I've statically assigned the 4805 MAC address, but what I have actually connected to the interface is the 4803 address. So let's go to the next part of our demonstration, which is being able to change the maximum number of addresses allowed on a port. So switch port security maximum, and we'll change the maximum to 2. What's going to happen when we change the maximum to 2 is it's going to keep the one static address that I've already configured. Not keep the address, I'm sorry. It's going to allow the address that I configured if it sees that come through the interface. And then it will learn dynamically one other address. And this time it'll be my PC. So then when I recover or I do a shut, no shut to get out of error disabled, I won't go back into error disabled right away. Switch port. So the command to change the number of MAC addresses that are seen or that can be seen over that interface is switch port security maximum, and then the number. If we go back, get rid of that 2 and hit a question mark. The addresses, you can have 1 to 44,096. I only want 2. All right, so we changed that. We want to do a shut. Oh, let's do the first thing. Let's do a show run begin. We're going to begin the first time it sees 0/6, which will bring us to the fast Ethernet 06. We see our configuration, switch port mode access. We're allowing 2 addresses now. This is our statically assigned address, or our statically allowed address, and just that we enabled it. Now let's go through and do a shut. And then a no shut. And that should bring us out of error disabled mode. So let's do a show in FA0/6. And in fact, we do see now that we're up and we're connected. So this interface is running properly right now. Let's go back and look at our port security again. Show port security interface FA0/6. Now we can see, again, still enabled. Now it's secure up instead of shut down. It also allows 2 addresses, and it's actually learned 2 addresses, and it says you've configured one of them. So what this tells me is I'm allowed 2. I've statically configured one of them that's allowed. The other one is learned dynamically. So the last thing, let's do a show run and begin again at 0/6 so we can see that interface. Just verify again. We don't see the second MAC address. We only see the one that we configured. Let's do, so the last thing that I really want to do and maybe there's two last things, if there's such a thing, is do sticky learning, which means once it learns the address, keep it and put it in the running config. Int phase 0/6, wow, slash switch port security. I should just tab complete, it's faster. MAC address, and then sticky. Okay, so this time it says, go ahead and learn my MAC address, keep it, put it in the running config. So if we do a show run here, hopefully it does what I want it to do. I always hate doing demos, you never know. Oh, so do show run, pipe it to begin at 0/6. And it did learn my other address. I could have, I suppose, included MAC address and I would have saw these three commands, but now we can see everything under the interface and we can see that it did dynamically learn the address and put it in the running config. That's the other thing. It dynamically learned the address before and allowed it packets from that address to come through. What it didn't do is put it in the running config. So now I could do a copy run start, and if something would happen or the switch would reload for whatever reason or I would reload it, it would have both of these addresses. These would be the only two allowed in. It wouldn't learn another address. So it's kind of a bit of a compromise between administratively assigning every single address and allowing it to learn it, then keep it. I think that's pretty much it. I guess what we didn't do is we didn't do a violation. I'm not actually going to change it. So I'm not actually going to change from shutdown, but I'll show you that we could change from shutdown. So if we do a switch port security violation, then my options are protect, restrict, or shut down. Okay. If I protect it, if I type in protect here, and that's all I have to do and I hit enter, I'm not going to do that because I don't really want to change it. But protect says, you know, it'll stop sending the frames. It'll stop taking those frames in, but it won't tell you about it. Restrict says, I'm going to stop taking those frames into the interface, but I'll send a syslog to let you know, and I'll also send an ccnp trap to let you know. And then the last thing was, just real quick so you guys can see it, was the error disable recovery. So we have an error disable recovery, the cause, and I can pick all kinds of causes. Here we're going to do port security. There are all kinds of different situations that cause an interface to go into error disabled state. These are all these. We're specifically looking for port security violation. So we do error disable recovery cause port security violation. The default, it'll by default check and fix it, I guess, recover from it every 300 seconds, I think it is. I could change that, so you could do an error disable recovery and then the timer. So we have cause and interval. We could do the interval and then put that in seconds if I wanted to do that more often. But that's it. I think that's the end of port security or configuring port security. Good luck.